Western Thailand, with its magical scenery, is today one of the world's top tourist destinations. But back in the Second World War, there was nothing magical about this place, for it was here, through the country's tropical rainforest, that the notorious Death Railway ran. The railway had its origins early in 1942. The Japanese had by then gained complete control of all Southeast Asia except for the British colony of Burma. In March they captured the capital Rangoon, but as they battled northwards, their supply problems became critical. The best route to Burma was by sea, but only 2/3 of their ships were getting through due to Allied submarine attacks. By the summer of 1942, it was down to a half. The solution was to build a railway. Rejected as uneconomic in peacetime, the route now became strategically vital for the Japanese. Providing a new link from Bangkok to Rangoon, it would be safely out of range of Allied naval guns and pass through dense jungle with optimum cover against air attack. At Kanchanaburi, here on the banks of the River Kwai, what is now a bustling and prosperous tourist centre was once the site of a vast prisoner of war camp, construction base for the Burma Railway, and headquarters of the Japanese 9th Railway Regiment. It was estimated by the engineers that the time needed to build the Burma Railway would be 4 years, but the High Command ordered it done in 1. A museum at Kanchanaburi commemorates the vast labour force of 250,000 men, comprising both Allied prisoners of war and Asian forced labour, packed into boxcars for transport to the River Kwai. They were set to work in August 1942, but disease and ill treatment took a massive toll. A local artist vividly depicts the scene as prisoners were driven like slaves to build the line which finally opened in October 1943. In the rush to complete it, a staggering 85,000 men perished, 12,500 of them Allied prisoners of war. Not for nothing was it dubbed the Death Railway. Displayed outside is one of the locomotives that hauled Allied prisoners of war from Singapore to their fate on the Kwai. British-built in 1919, she was requisitioned by the Japanese from the Malay States Railway. In happier times, this P-class Pacific took the mail trains from Singapore to Kuala Lumpur. Also here is one of the Japanese locomotives used during the war. Built in 1937, she's a branch line engine of the Japanese Railway's C-56 class. 90 of them were adapted to the meter gauge and shipped to Siam and Burma for wartime service from 1942 onwards. With only a 10-ton load on the axles, these lightweight engines were a perfect choice for a jungle railway. Steam ended on Thailand's railways over 30 years ago when diesels took over, but a few locomotives have been kept for tourist excursions. Being prepared here at Kanchanaburi Station is number 850, a Pacific type supplied by Kawasaki in Japan in 1950 as war reparations. Though longer and heavier than the wartime engines, it still has only 10.5 tons on the driving axles. Prestige loco in the steam fleet is number 953, a Mikado type, also Japanese built in the 50s. Smartly turned out, she's the regular loco for specials on the King's birthday and a favourite for weekend trips on the Death Railway. The surviving part of the Burma Railway now carries tourists who arrive by the trainload. They swarm across the tracks of the bridge on the River Kwai, made famous by the cinema film. The human sacrifice involved in building such an ordinary-looking railway, a constant source of wonder. Everyone scatters onto specially built platforms as the train to Kanchanaburi whistles furiously to claim its right-of-way across the River Kwai. The resort area now extends upriver, way beyond the famous bridge. Where prisoners once toiled, there are chalet hotels, floating restaurants, and jungle trails. Elephants formerly used to haul timber out of the forest now find alternative employment in the tourist industry. But top attraction is still the railway itself. At Whampoa, 63 kilometres from Kanchanaburi, are the original wooden trestles of the Death Railway. Every day, hundreds of visitors pick their way gingerly over its creaking timbers. Many of them are Japanese, determined to overcome any fear of heights to see this historic railway, almost as though it were a pilgrimage. But there's no risk of being run down by a train. They have to travel at walking pace, for fear of imminent collapse of the structure, so there's plenty of time to get out of the way. Officially, the slow crawl is to give passengers time to admire the view. But a close look at the timber supports does make you wonder. They are the original ones assembled by wartime prisoners from locally felled teak. Only this most durable of woods could have survived 60 years in these tropical conditions, but for how much longer? After its opening in October 1943, the Burma-Siam Railway operated for just 20 months, only 6 months longer than it took to build it. Damage by Allied bombers and constant problems with track subsidence and weak bridges meant the Japanese achieved less than a third of the line's intended rate of supply. Its chief value in the end was to assist their retreat when the tide of war had turned against them. After the Japanese surrender in 1945, their troops were taken prisoner. Taskmasters turned labourers, some are seen here in loincloths assisting Allied clear-up operations at Tamajo at kilometre 236. The British had no interest in repairing either the railway or its damaged locomotives. They thought it might compete with the Empire's seaborne trade between India and the Far East. So in late 1946, the Burma-Siam Railway was abandoned. But the Thai government saw the potential of the Kwai Valley section and decided to repair the famous bridge, ironically with Japanese assistance. They restored the railway in stages as finance permitted and reached Whampoa here in 1952. The trains brought the first post-war visitors and the beginnings of the tourist trade. In 1957, a terminus was established next to the site of the former prisoner of war camp at Taso, 80 kilometres from the bridge on the River Kwai. The local timber trade, originally started by the construction of the railway, had prospered after the war, and the nearby village of Nam Tok needed proper transport for it. Right up to the end of steam in 1976, the original Japanese engines were used. With their 10-ton axle load, they were ideally suited for the ramshackle Whampoa trestles. End of track is 3 kilometres past Nam Tok railhead at Khao Phang, where a surplus C-56 loco has been put on display. The site was chosen because the track thus far was fairly easy to restore, and the adjacent waterfalls are popular with tourists. Any further restoration northward would be impractical. For example, a new bridge would be needed here to replace the wooden original, long since washed away. Also, apart from massive jungle clearance, scores of collapsed earthworks, bridges and blocked cuttings would have to be built again from scratch. After 60 years of disuse, much of the track bed beyond Nam Tok towards Burma has been reclaimed by the jungle. But lest we forget, one notorious place, the Konyu Cutting, 36 kilometres from Nam Tok, was cleared after several years' hard work by volunteers from Australia, whose government now maintains it as a path of remembrance. For many months, isolated work sites like this in the middle of the route could only be supplied by river or jungle trail. In the 1943 monsoon floods, they were completely cut off. The resulting starvation made worse by a deadly outbreak of cholera that swept unchecked through the camps, killing thousands. This was when the Japanese imposed their notoriously brutal Speedo regime to stop construction work falling behind. This quarter-mile section was dubbed Hellfire Pass after the flares that lit the place at night so the guards could enforce round-the-clock labour. Those who faltered were beaten, and punishment often resulted in death. Visitors can try to imagine hacking into this rock with nothing more than a pick and shovel to do the job, and pay their respects to the 400 Australian and British prisoners of war who died at this one spot alone. The barbarous treatment of the savage Speedo regime was repeated in camps the whole length of the line. Every one of these place names represents a piece of sheer hell on earth for the thousands who toiled and died in this benighted corner of Asia. The line crossed the border with Burma at the Three Pagodas Pass, 358 kilometres from Bangkok. There's no visible trace of the railway here, just a signpost welcoming foreign tourists to Myanmar, as Burma now calls itself, provided they take no pictures. World War II may be history, but fresh problems have arisen in its wake. The sign fails to mention that the frontier road is actually closed to foreigners due to problems with the Karen tribal insurgency, which still lingers more than half a century after Burmese independence. So the course of the railway here is inaccessible, sealed off in its jungle limbo. To see what we can of the Death Railway on the Burmese side, we have to retrace our steps to Bangkok, leave Thailand and travel by air to Rangoon. Then we shall backtrack by rail towards the Thai border on a fascinating trip through eastern Burma, observing traces of the 1942 Japanese campaign en route. We start in the Burmese capital Rangoon, now called Yangon, which retains a strong atmosphere of the 1940s. Grand buildings of British origin survive, along with a city bus service still using converted Allied Army one-tonners from the 1945 liberation. Burma was actually part of British India until 1937. Its hiving off as a separate dominion was marked by the creation of grand avenues and fine new buildings intended to bring into the modern age this ancient city dominated by the famous Golden Shwedagon Temple. In this late flowering of the British Empire, an imposing new railway terminal was designed in unusual Asian Art Deco style, with fine turrets and a grand entrance hall. A railway system 3,000 kilometres in length deserved nothing less. Still around are dependable British steam locomotives like this YC Class Pacific. The few survivors are used for ballast workings and slow trains, but sometimes they head up a tourist passenger special, and we were fortunate enough to catch one to Bago, 80 kilometres away, for the first leg of our trip to the east. The departure platform was specially cleared by the railway security force, as contact between locals and foreign tourists is unfortunately not encouraged by the present regime. With only 2 coaches, it was a bit short for a real express, but the splendidly restored train still cut a dash as it left the former Imperial Station. Travelling north out of Rangoon, our special took us through suburban stations where steam is a rare sight nowadays. The official uniform of our engine crew was strangely naval-looking. Gleaming white at odds with the inevitable grime of a steam locomotive. This is the first section of the longest narrow-gauge double track in the world, 350 kilometres to Myanmar on the main line to Mandalay. Another solid piece of British engineering is this steel bridge over a tributary of the Irrawaddy. The comfort on board the saloon of the tourist train is not typical of all Burmese trains, as we shall see later. Fresh from the workshops, our locomotive reminds us of former days on express and mail service to Mandalay, albeit now with a featherweight train. Originally designed for India in 1928 for the Pune Expresses, this YC-class Pacific was better suited to the long, almost level main line of the Burma Plains. Our special arrives at Bago, or Pegu as it used to be known, a major railway junction on the route to Mandalay, where the eastern line to Moulmein and the Thai border branches off. A small town at a major crossroads, Bago is often neglected by visitors. The town is dominated by the pagoda of the golden god Paya, even taller than the great Shwedagon in Rangoon. But hidden away under this large iron shed resembling a railway station is something quite remarkable. When widening the railway in 1903, the Calcutta engineers, Burns and Co. excavated a local hillside for building stone. But the stone was found to be painted. It turned out to be none other than the legendary giant reclining Buddha, dating back to the 10th century AD and thought to have been destroyed by earthquake. In fact, it had merely been buried. Claimed to be Asia's largest, this amazing relic was duly restored and protected by a glazed iron canopy specially made for it by the railway builders. It's 55 metres long and 16 metres high. The truly godlike dimensions of each body part are proudly displayed for the benefit of tourists. Unfazed by a 6-foot big toe, the locals get on with the serious business of worship. Returning now to the railway, we find 20th century treasure trove in the form of a fine collection of classic British locomotives, all of pre-war Indian standard design. The railways now use diesels, but seasonal and extra trains are still covered by steam. On the right here in Bago steam shed is a YD class with smaller driving wheels, a bit slower than the large-wheeled Pacific, but with better acceleration and power. Out in the yard, the time warp continues. The wooden signal box with clattering brass levers handles all traffic north and south to Mandalay and Rangoon, and the eastern line to Moulmein as well. A long-distance train now arrives behind a French-built diesel loco of the 1970s. In traditional fashion, a steam-hauled local train waits in the bay platform. The locomotive, a slightly smaller Pacific, a YB, also an Indian Railways type. Passengers settle down in the best seats available, in ordinary class, for the daily run eastward to the villages of the Sittang plain. After leaving the main line at Bago, trains for Moulmein cross a series of coastal inlets which get wider the further east they go. The single-span bascule lifting bridge at War is one of many railway bridges in Burma that had to be rebuilt after war damage. The calm backwaters of the Sittang floodplain offer no natural defence against invasion from the east, and back in 1942 the Japanese correctly judged that once across the Sittang, Burma would be theirs for the taking. In February 1942, British Army columns on their retreat from the east were attacked by RAF fighters and Blenheim bombers in a tragic friendly fire incident near Chak Teo. In the ensuing delay, while regrouping, they were outflanked by the Japanese, who caught up with them at Mokpelin as they started to cross the Sittang. The 11-span railway bridge built in 1907 over this fast-flowing river was the only route available to the British to consolidate their forces further west and defend Rangoon. But it carried just railway track, no road, and precious hours were spent while planks were laid between the rails. On February the 22nd, the British fought a tough battle to secure the bridge, but with under half their strength available, the remainder still catching up after Chak Teo, they were hopelessly outnumbered. By evening, the Japanese had set up a machine gun post on the east bank covering the bridge. The British commander had no choice but to get his sappers to set charges under cover of darkness and blow the bridge to deny the Japanese the use of it. With the flag of the rising sun already hoisted over Pagoda Hill, the painful order was given. At dawn on February the 23rd, 1942, the two centre spans disappeared in a massive explosion. 2/3 of the British forces, 2,500 men, were caught on the wrong side. Those who couldn't swim were killed or captured. It was a bad day for the British, as a direct result of which the Japanese came to occupy almost the whole country, right up to the Indian border in the north. But at least the cutting of the bridge gave enough respite to enable the British to evacuate Rangoon, and also weakened the Japanese supply line. When they rebuilt it a year later, its exposed position made it a clear target for Allied Air Force bombers who took full advantage. After the British had successfully driven out the Japanese in 1945, engineers found that 3.5 years of neglect had left the banks of the Sittang eroded and the pier foundations deeply scoured. The bridge was declared unsafe and abandoned, the surviving 8 spans being floated off to reconstruction sites elsewhere. A replacement ferry service was to last 16 years before a railway diversion was eventually built to a new road-cum-rail bridge which opened in 1962, long after Burmese independence. The new bridge is on a more stable site, 10 kilometres to the north of the old one, beyond the reach of the Sittang's destructive tidal bore. But the original railway to the Sittang has not been entirely abandoned. It's in use as a branch line as far as Nyong Kashe, railhead for the villages on the floodplain west of the river. We joined this relic of the old direct route, now off the beaten track, as travellers struggled to get their livestock and chattels on board. Just after leaving Abia Junction, one can see the diverted main line to the new bridge on the left. Our locomotive with the daily mixed train trundles on down the original alignment. Riding with the passengers, we get the true feel of local rail travel in Burma, quite a change from the luxury of the tourist train. The last place in Asia, probably the world, where open wagons are used for passenger transport. Not recommended in the monsoon rains. In the relative comfort of ordinary class, at least there are seats, albeit of hard wood, and a roof over one's head. Meanwhile, the train to nowhere reaches the end of its run. Formerly a way station, now a small terminus, Nyong Kashe briefly springs to life once a day as arriving and departing traffic all has to be dealt with in just 1 hour before the train sets off on its return trip. At the booking office, extremely small sums of money are diligently taken in exchange for old-style Edmondson card railway tickets. Transfer of goods from rail to road is just as it was when the line opened in 1907. Where the railway tracks continue towards the Sittang Bridge, there's just a dirt path now. This is where the remnants of the 17th Indian Division retreated westwards after the Sittang debacle in 1942. Across the Sittang on the east side is Mokpalin. The railway yard here was the scene of fierce fighting in February 1942, when it changed hands 2 or 3 times in as many days. Lying here are more World War II relics, British Indian locomotives from the 1920s and 30s, the survivors of bombing raids and sabotage by both sides in the conflict. In 1946, only 107 engines were left of the pre-war stock of 370. 263 destroyed engines make for an ample supply of parts for recycling, including these chimneys decorating the yard. One reason so much old equipment remains in use in Burma is that after the 1948 independence, much of the railway system was sabotaged by disaffected tribal groups. Newly repaired wartime damage would be blown up again, so for well over a decade there was little incentive to invest in modern infrastructure. Some of the issues involved simmer to this day, hence the draconian government slogans on display everywhere. The new Sittang Bridge was held up nearly 8 years because of these problems. Based in Mokpalin, the authorities still carry out regular security patrols on the line to Moulmein using these armour-plated scout cars. The railway community in this outlying district has of necessity to be self-sufficient and maintains its own school within the railway compound. Education of railway staff was always a priority in colonial times, and the tradition continues, including the teaching of English. At Mokpalin Station, a stopping train clanks off towards Moulmein in a scene that could have been taken 70 years before. The train service today consists of one through passenger from Rangoon and a mixed train from Bago, the latter sometimes steam-hauled when a diesel is under repair. trains rattle peacefully through tranquil landscapes where much fighting took place in February 1942. Here in Mon State, east of the Sittang, we travelled by road, the better to capture the atmosphere of this forgotten corner of Asia. The modern world has little impact here. We waited at a crossing for one of Burma's homemade rail cars to pass on the local shuttle to Martaban. The terminus at Martaban, now called Motama, is 315 kilometres from Rangoon on the west bank of the next major river, the Salween. 2.5 miles wide, it forms the northern tip of the Andaman Sea and makes the Sittang seem small by comparison. There was no train ferry here, only a barge to carry rolling stock for repair. It could carry a few wagons at a time, but was hardly conducive to the swift transport of men and equipment urgently needed by the Japanese during the war to back up their invasion. This was the bottleneck the Death Railway led to. 60 years later, nothing had changed. It's only now, in the 21st century, that a bridge is finally being built to replace the ferry crossing to Moulmein on the opposite bank. Moulmein is an ancient town with a large Muslim community, the former capital of British Burma in the mid-19th century. Once a major port, it now has a gentle air of post-colonial decay, though the town centre with its makeshift transport is busy enough. Rudyard Kipling, in his one brief visit in the 1890s, famously climbed up the old Moulmein pagoda, looking lazy at the sea. Though on our visit there was no Burma girl to be seen, hardly even the sea. The dominant feature now is the distinctly unromantic view of the town prison. "50 kilometres south of Moulmein, signs of former times can be found in the former British colonial outpost at Thanbyuzayat. A local dignitary here is using the official vehicle left behind by the departing district commissioner in 1948. It seems his rank was too low to warrant the cost of a complete car, so just the engine and chassis of a Woolsey 14 were shipped out, and the locals did the rest. The wooden body may look primitive, but the vehicle is quite luxurious compared to the rough two-stroke trucks that are common in these parts. Thanbyuzayat was the site of the northern end of the Burma-Siam Railway, where it joined the Burma Railway's isolated southeastern branch to Yei. The train from Moulmein passes a sign which leaves us in no doubt of the location. At this Death Railway Memorial site, life-size figures represent sick and starving Allied prisoners and their Japanese overseers. In fact, few Allied POWs were based here, most of them being deployed up the line on the arduous jungle sections of the railway. But the base hospital was here for a time. Before it was moved, 30 POW patients were killed in Liberator bombing raids in the summer of 1943. Displayed here on the site of the former locomotive depot is a Japanese wartime C-56 locomotive that fell into Allied hands at the end of the war. Altogether, 31 of this type of engine were deployed by the Japanese on Burma's railways, with another 41 on the prisoners' line to Thailand. The British Commonwealth War Graves Commission has laid out a cemetery nearby, its elegantly designed entrance with iron gates set in a pergola of ashlar stone. 3,700 men are buried here, being 27% of the Allied prisoners who died building the railway. Other prisoners' remains are buried in cemeteries near the River Kwai in Thailand. All the Allied nationalities involved are represented here: Britons, Australians, New Zealanders, Canadians, Dutchmen and others, with Rupert Brooke's immortal words on many of the British ones. While most of the Death Railway in Thailand can be visited, in Burma the site at Thanbyuzayat is the only one permitted. The rest of the 118-kilometre Burmese section lies in restricted territory and is inaccessible beyond here. So all we can do now is briefly revisit our chart and show the camp names, numbers and dates on the now hidden trace towards the Three Pagodas Pass on the Thai border. In Thailand, they not only have part of the railway still in operation, but actually have two of the Japanese wartime engines in working order. They are the same lightweight C-56 type, examples of which we have seen displayed at several locations. Thailand Railways number 713 also carries special number plates, C5615, its Japanese original. With Japanese and Thai flags on the front, it's dressed up for the unusual task of starring in a sound and light show on the Kwai Bridge to commemorate the Burma Railway. Leaving nothing to chance, another one, number 715, is held as standby at Kanchanaburi station. At nightfall, the decorated loco heads off for the bridge to take part in the show. The event is held every year on the occasion of the King of Thailand's birthday in December and is a popular event attracting thousands, mostly Thais themselves, whose own World War II sufferings are often overlooked by Westerners. Pièce de résistance for the rail fan is the reenactment of the Japanese inaugural train crossing the bridge on October the 25th, 1943. Cardboard cutouts of Japanese guards complete the theatrical effect. Wonders whether the first wartime train really whistled as much as this one. But as a piece of living theatre with a steam locomotive, it's hard to beat. The Kwai spectacular ends with fireworks simulating the Allied raid by Liberator bombers, which put the bridge out of action in 1945. Spectators disperse to the soundtrack of British prisoners whistling the Colonel Bogey March. The next morning, it was business as usual as another tourist train crossed the famous bridge with a weekend excursion to Whampoa. Built at such enormous human cost, and now fulfilling a role its builders could scarcely have imagined, the Kwai Valley Line forms a living memorial to the tens of thousands who toiled and died building the Burma Railway.